With the massification of education over recent decades came the promise of social mobility. Everybody can access great positions after fulfilling their dream of studying at universities. And did this happen? Well, it's not so clear. There certainly has been an expansion of the educational system, but there has also been a division within the educational system. Some elite institutions emerge that are not actually accessible so easily for everybody that is not an elite already when they enter. How do these processes work, and how do these institutions develop? What do they have as characteristics? How do they manage to stop students that are not already elite from entering? And what are the consequences of having this bifurcated system and this differentiation for students aspiring to enter university? What are the implications for students that do manage to enter coming from different backgrounds? Are they happy there? Do they become elites automatically? Do they maybe suffer because they're different? All these questions we will be discussing today with our invited expert, Dr. Cristóbal Villalobos, who is a Chilean specialist on studying educational systems in Chile. We hope that you'll get something out of this conversation about the power of educational institutions to decrease or to not decrease inequalities. Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Future Frame TV. I'm your host, Alice Krozer. The program is presented by Traces.Dreams, and we're very grateful to have you here again to talk another time, another day about inequalities. And today I have a distinguished guest from Chile, who is currently in Rio, in Brazil, but originally from Chile, Dr. Cristóbal Villalobos. He is the Vice Director of the Research Center for Politics and Practice of Education at the Catholic University in Santiago de Chile, in Chile. And he's an education specialist, and we will talk about the practices and politics of education, especially elite education, what that means, and what the implications of something like elite education are for elite and non-elite people all over the country, and probably also other contexts beyond Chile. Cristóbal, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Well, we're very glad to have you here because we want to talk about some recent research that you did with some colleagues of yours about the role that elite institutions play, elite higher institutions, that is universities particularly, play in the reproduction of elites and thus inequality. And as you know, we're interested in subjects related to inequality in this channel, and we want to know a little bit more about how these processes of redistribution work. So I'd like to ask you if you could tell us a little bit about these institutions and their role, and if you can maybe define first what is actually an elite institutions. What do you mean by that when you write about the role that they have in this reproduction of inequality?
Well, first, the elite institution is not a new institution. For example, I don't know, Harvard or Cambridge are very old institutions and exist in all countries. But in the case of Latin American countries, and in specific in Chile, these institutions take a specific place in terms geographically and in terms of the situation from economic relationships or to the politics. In our case, we try to understand how these institutions works, and our first form to understand this topic is think more in general who are elite institutions. We concentrate in 3 points. First, the elite institutions are institutions that concentrate students with social and economical and capital cultural. This implies that these institutions overrepresent students for a higher class, but other types of students with higher tests, white students and non-indigenous students. And this concentration is from supply and demand. Second,
What do you mean by supply and demand? So that's the students and the institutions that represent these characteristics, or?
We think that students select this institution, but at the same time, the institution selects this type of students. It's a match because the students think this university likes me, and at the same time, the students say, I'm trying to engage this type of students with high qualifications, a student with a father or mother with a higher education, these characteristics. Well, the second characteristic is that in general, these institutions work like a company. In the Chilean case, and I say in the Latin American countries, this characteristic operates to public and private institutions. Is more than the dependency, is the form to work the institution. The institutions try to respond to the market supply, thinking who is possible to create the new elites, who is the necessities of the elites in this country. This is very important because implies some knowledge, some characteristics, some form to present the careers and the degrees, and that it's very specific. And the last one is more related to the architecture, to the forms live in the university, more related to the higher class habitus. That means the general characteristics or cultural characteristics to the higher class, more related to the rich people in general. And this is important because many peoples go to university, for these universities to trying this new taste of this new music, I don't know.
Yeah, you mentioned that you're using the Bourdieusian framework, and for those non-sociologists or people that have lived under a stone in a cave for some years and don't know who Bourdieu is, maybe you can say something about this characteristic of cultural influence, because that's particularly important in your research also. It's not just about qualifications, it's not just about the educational attainment, it's very importantly about forming or preserving a certain style, we could say a lifestyle, right? With the cultural tastes, you mentioned the music, other cultural tastes maybe as well, and social capital and all these different capitals. Could you say something more about what this is for people that don't know about it?
Yeah, Bourdieu say that habitus is very similar to the habitus de corps. Form is who I am in a social space. Maybe this is not a good definition, but it's our interiorized form to live, the form to be in the world is very important because show our relation with our class in a very tiny manner. And we think that in general in the institutions, this characteristic is very important because no is it too many difference in terms of mechanism of selection, but the difference are more in these particular characteristics.
So when these universities select for their students, you're saying they focus on these other characteristics?
Yeah, no directly, because obviously exists a national test that discriminate using GPA and a standardized test. But in other cases, additionally, for example, a letter, the students need to take a letter with who I am, who is my characteristic, who I define me. And this is evaluated in a more cultural match that is more important than the economic match in this sense, or the social match.
Yeah, this is interesting because this aggregate the characteristics that universities use for selecting their applicants, right? And You define some characteristics that people bring from their households of origin. So you name them inheritance, I think. And then some other characteristics that they acquire during their university trajectory. So there's a sort of a culturization in their university experience that forms them, maybe, or does it? Or what is the role of universities there?
Yeah, I think it's in general exist two types of elite universities. For one hand, exist the traditional elite universities that form more the political and cultural elites. But at the same time, in the recent, I don't know, 3 or 4 decades, appears new types of elite universities, more related in Latin American cases to the neoconservative groups like Opus Dei or Legionarios de Cristo. And this group forms in a more endogamous manner and more related to the economic power. And these two groups are very different in the mechanism of selection, and in the curricular track exists an important difference. And in the case of Chile, another difference is the location. The traditional universities are ubicated in the middle of the power, 2 or 3 blocks to the political center. And in the case of the new elite universities are out of the city in the Los Andes. And this geographical differentiation is very strong, because the students that take families in the rich neighborhoods go to these new elite universities, and the other are more open to middle class.
And I want to come back to this keyword middle class in a moment, and what the impact on students is from different backgrounds when they go to these institutions. But before, I'd like to ask you about another characteristic of these institutions that I know you're looking into right now in your current research, which is very surprising. It's kind of obvious when you think about it, when you look at these institutions' websites, for example, but it's still surprising that it's used so strategically, and that's the look of these places, right? The architecture, as you were mentioning before, and also the location. And so there are very strategic characteristics behind these institutions to make them appear elite universities. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. This is very interesting point, because the photography and the imaginary that these universities constructs is very strong. For example, in the case of more traditional universities, the architecture is more related to European architecture. The lines, bigger lines that open to the big doors, and trying to show an open university. But paradoxically, when we show the data, this university isn't too open. And in another case, in some cases, the architecture and the imaginary are more related to the Catholicism. For example, using murals about priests, or I don't know, or constructing the idea to the future. It's very important to the elite universities in general, show that we are the future. In these places, the future are formed, and the future of the country and the humanity, maybe. In my university, for example, exist doors without contact, totally necessary. But this is an example to the imagine of these institutions. In general, this is the imagine. We are the future. This is the place when the startups come on. In this place, many companies grow. And in these institutions, it's possible to think more about to the future of the technology and to the society.
And is there a clear difference between, along these same lines, between the public and the private elite institutions? Because clearly they have, or I am imagining they have different objectives, or they have different needs to boast their technological advances, or how does that divide?
Yeah, I think this In some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. For example, in the case of the public university, this imaginary of the elite is concentrated on faculties. For example, in the faculty of economy, in the faculty of law, in the faculty of medicine. And in these cases, the general idea is in these places we formed to the elite politics. For example, it's very interesting. We analyze on a faculty of medicine, and this former know to practice medicine. In this institution, formed the student to direct hospitals or direct the general system. And this is the difference. The same for the law. Is not to people to practice the law privately. No, this is
become
not
judges.
Yes, yeah, yeah. This is not important, and this is one difference. But in general, for the commodification process of the entire higher university, in general, all private and public universities talk very similar things. For example, in the methods of selection, in the forms to understand the success for the students, or the importance of the papers, or this form of metrics. In these cases, is in general very similar, public and private.
Yeah, I have so many questions there about our role as academics in these institutions in the perpetuation of inequality. But I'd like first to come back, as I said, to the perception of the students that enter these institutions, because you have a very interesting paper on how students that are not, let's say, elite in your definition from where they come from their background, but that are actually middle class or other social backgrounds that enter these institutions, and how do they adapt to this context? Because it turns out that it's not so smooth and it's not so easy for these students to fit into this very specific environment. Could you tell us a bit about their emotions and their reaction and their struggles in these institutions?
Yeah. We focus in this point because in the last years, in some cases, this university opened more for middle and low and middle class. This open is around 10% of the students at least, but exist. And we talk with the students. We have an approach more related to understand their lives and the styles of life, and how they enter to university change this life. And the main result of this specific paper is that the students suffer in these institutions, but it's not an individual suffer. It's more on a social suffer related to the distance between their forms of life and the form of life that the elite universities imposes. And this suffering is evident, for example, in this university, don't take the possibility to go to the parties, don't feel comfortable in the classes, don't feel that they are fit with the other students, don't have too much friends. And this is because all the pressure are in their academic success, and they don't take the possibility to experience the another part of the university life.
Yes, of course, what you associate with university life and being a student, right? Go to parties and have fun, and so for them, it turns out it's mainly about sacrifice. And you also write about the pressure that they have, not only from the institution but from their families or from their background, because they are expected to excel, probably.
Yeah, and the other point is more psychological and are related with a distance in the styles of their family and their styles and their new styles. This is a new studies in terms of the, I don't know, the form of talk. And for example, in sociology, say there's a class differences. Or Bourdieu again say this in a divided culture. When the people say, now I am to this form in this situation, and I am another people in this another situation.
So like split personality, yeah. Almost.
Yeah, it's very similar. And this produces an internal conflict in day-to-day when the students don't take to look, for example, the house to the other students, or don't show the intimities for many, I don't know, the car difference or the compute difference in the notebook, I don't know, or the pencil difference. All is different in these cases, and this produces a stress in their lives.
Yeah, that certainly brings back an important role for us as instructors in these institutions, right? Or as employees, teaching personnel, we could say. What do you think we could do to lessen this suffering for these people? Or how could we integrate the groups? Or, I mean, of course, in not only in elite institutions, in general, you know, how can we guarantee that that students are more comfortable in these learning environments where they feel they have deficits or where they don't feel they fit in?
Yeah, I think in the case of Latin American countries are very concentrated to open the universities in the first moment, in the first year in general. But to the other years, the universities and the general educational system don't. It's not important to think more how all the students are feeling good. And I think this is a cultural change into the universities more than to transform the mechanism of enter to the universities. I think to change, for example, the form of take classes. In general, the classes are very hierarchical. That only reproduce the difficulties of the secondary or the primary. For other hand, it's necessary that the university open more to the territory to understand more the who is happening in the local context. And finally, I think it's important too that the culture of the medium and low class enter to the university. This imply, I don't know, another type of parties, another type of again food, another type to live in the university, less related to the idea when we go to the university we are part to a selected group, or we are part to the social benefits for the system. I think this is some ideas to transform this scenario.
Yeah, that will be very important, I guess, because you also talk about the massification of education, right? And the promise behind this massification of recent years and decades was precisely that it would allow for more social mobility, and it would decrease this hierarchy between social classes or social backgrounds, and hence decrease inequality in the end. Would you say that has been successful, or that's a rhetorical question, of course?
Yeah. I think it exists two forms to respond. First, when we show all the data, effectively the massification permits to reduce the gap between social classes in terms of the number of years that the people study. And this is very important. But at the same time, the massification produces a split to the types of the universities. In general, elite universities are not preferred to the middle and lower classes. And It's not easy because the solution is not reduce the process of massification, and it's not only change the mechanism of selection. I think it's now when in all of Latin American countries, for example, the demand of free education is very important because permits to rethink who enter to university and what is the objective of the university for the society, and talk more about the social objectives of the university and less to the individual benefits to the university. I think it's more important. Think more that the enter to university is to contribute to the society and less to take more salary in the future. It's very important. And the salary is this another topic. I think you are more expert in this topic, but this is all.
Yeah, that's a very important point, right? To reconsider the role that universities play on a societal level rather than only on the individual level, only on benefiting me as an individual. Knowledge as such is a public good, right? And an educated society has advantages over one that doesn't have access to these goods. Cristóbal, before we come to a close, I'd like to ask you what made you start looking into these things in the first place? Why do you think, or why did you think then it was an interesting subject, which it clearly turns out it is, but how did you start researching these things?
Now I move to understand more the other levels of the educational system. For one hand, we are trying to understand more clearly the relation between primary and secondary elites institutions and the relation with the university institutions. And for other hand, we are trying to understand the role of the post-secondary studies in the reproduction of the list, especially because I think that you and me are part on some types of elites, a more knowledge elites or cultural elites, I don't know the name exactly, but we have a possibility to impact in our societies, and in general, all the researchers are more concentrated in economics and political elites, and I think we need to think more about our position. This is my two sides now.
Yes, I think that's very important to emphasize the responsibility we have with this knowledge, or with this access, or with this reach also, right? And use it wisely, all of you who have it, all of us who have it. Cristóbal, thank you so much for being on the program and for telling us more about how educational systems reproduce, elite education systems specifically reproduce inequality. And we hope that in the future we'll be more conscious about this and be able to decrease the inequalities with education. And in the meantime, we'll continue studying educational practices and the secrets behind them. Thank you so much. Thank you all for watching another episode of Future Frame TV. I'm Elise Krozer, your host for the Inequalities channel, and we hope you want to join us again next time for another chat, conversation, discussion about topics related to inequality. Have a nice afternoon, and looking forward to see you again. Bye-bye.